to another episode of Tea and Stuff. I'm joined today by Suzette Hammond. When I think about a couple of weeks ago when I was asking for just like, hey, who do you guys want to see? You know, who would you like to hear me talk with? You were a name that came up very frequently. So, and I had
that's funny.
I've heard your full, like your Suzette, like your name. I've heard that. I've been familiar with your name for a while now, but just was made the correlation to, oh, this is who is the Being Tea account. And I was like, oh, okay. And so then I, dug in a little bit more to just be like, oh, I wonder why, so many people specifically wanted to hear from you. And then I found out that you're an educator, which is ultra interesting. Are you a like K through 12 educated teacher, or are you mainly just a tea educator?
Just tea. Yeah.
Beautiful. And
that is my full-time work.
And then you got your sort of, I don't know if this was your start, but I know you worked for, was it Pete's Coffee?
Yeah, that was the first full-time like tea coffee gig. Yeah.
What was
so
that?
That was basically like, yeah, when I transitioned, because my previous career area that I worked in was journalism. I was a newscast producer. And that's a whole thing. But when I transitioned out of that career and decided that's way too stressful, I thought I'm going to go work with coffee and tea for a while because I know I like it and it's not stressful, and I'm just going to like figure out my life while I'm doing this. And I ended up staying with Pete's for 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah. It was like a golden time to work for them. I still think very highly of them, but at that time, that's when they had like, it was Pete's Tea, not Mighty Leaf Tea, right? So it was like their own in-house tea, like so many different varieties. They all came in like these little beautiful, like kind of jewel toned cans and stuff. And like all the employees took like all these coffee and tea classes, and we got to, make new classes and do things for the public. And so I was a trainer for them, and I worked in 3 different states over the course of the 7 years. I worked in Portland, Oregon area. I worked in Boston, Massachusetts area, and then in the San Francisco Bay Area. So like I had the fun job of being able to teach people about coffee and tea.
That's kind of nice.
Yeah.
But
it was a cool gig.
Being able to do it under a company that already has their, their stuff together and ducks in a row, like you were just able to. That's interesting. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So then you did that gig for a number of years, and did you just have the need to move on, or did you have the inspiration to do more stuff that was branded by yourself, or?
Well, so by that point with them, I had really gone as far as I could under their structure of what they had. A lot of the folks who were field trainers with them now work for other coffee and tea companies. Like a lot of places you do a little digging, you'll find like, oh, that person worked at Pete's, they were a trainer. So like we all kind of like went out into the world. And so, like there wasn't really, that was one of the first companies and experiences that really got me thinking about like the through line for like what the education that we offer to people means, like where they can go with it, what they should do with it, how we develop people and create space for them, right? There just wasn't like an area for you to go beyond a certain like ceiling, like a point,
Yep.
Yeah. So like it wasn't a bad thing at all when I left. I mean, it was just sort of like, well, I guess it's time because I've done about all I can do here. So yes, I, worked for a number of different like tea companies and organizations after that. And, so like I worked for companies then as an employee and like educator total for about 13 years, counting the time at Pete's. And then, and the very beginning of 2015 is when I, found a bean tea and started working self-employed, which was like, oh my God.
Which is scary, but at the same time, it you struggle, but it's gratifying. In even when you struggle, there's still gratification to be had.
There's so much to learn. Yeah, like it really teaches you a lot about yourself. Yeah, as I'm sure you can relate. Like you learn all kinds of things that you could not learn in the same way, working for someone.
Yeah, and so I've always been a person that's been very difficult to work for other people. It's not like I can't work for someone else, but for me to be able to, I think, do things to where I do them best, I think I need, unfortunately, a lot of freedom to sort of do that.
Yeah.
And it's understandable that, like, even if you, I completely get, if you work for, a lot of people would say, oh, but you worked for them for 7 years, and why would you? It's like, oh, did you have some fallout? No, it's a growth thing. It's just
Yeah.
you, and not in a bad way to them. You outgrew what you were doing there, and
Yeah.
you wanted to
Yeah.
kind of expand and move on from that, and you saw a niche area where you thought, hey, this is where I can sort of really help fill in these people that I see are interested in T&T education. Maybe this is where I could help and take it a step further, type deal.
Yeah. I mean, like at the time, so it's just maybe some context. Like, I said before that we find the former trainers are kind of like all out there and doing a lot of things, and but at the time, like it was a very like everything was very contained within their world, right? All of our activities were very contained. And so at the time that like I first went to the World Tea Expo, which this year is celebrating its 20th anniversary, I guess. So I went there the first time, I think like the first or second year that was branded as World Tea Expo, because it used to be Take Me to Tea for like the first couple of years. It was called Take Me to Tea Expo. And so I went like the first year or two, sometime around there, when it was rebranded as World Tea Expo. And at the time that I went, is when I was a trainer with Pete's. And, as trainers, we worked really closely with the coffee and tea department, like the lead buyers for the coffee and tea department. Basically, like anything that they felt was pertinent or good information or fun to share, like we would like take that in and channel that and synthesize that and teach it to the staff. And the tea buyer, one of my first mentors in tea, like told me about this World Tea Expo thing. Is like, I think you might like that. And so I went. And at the time that I went, I was the first employee of the company outside of the tea buyer to ever go to a show like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like we were just very small and kind of contained, and we weren't really like the tea as an industry being very networked and stuff it's not quite the same as like coffee just yet, like where everybody in coffee's like it's all together, and all these different shows and venues, and tea's not quite like that professionally, like as an industry. And so like obviously this was like some years ago, but still that was a big deal. And so I think I'm sharing that because it kind of says something about the ceiling idea, like how far you can go with something before it's no longer just the pure thing itself. Like I loved the teaching part. All I wanted to do was teach and develop things. And so I wasn't interested in like marketing and all the other stuff.
The other responsibilities,
sales and things, and
the other things that come with working for someone else, working under someone else.
Right. Yeah. Like, all those other related skill sets obviously they're really important. Like I wish I understood more about marketing and things like that. I know some, but, like my specialty, my work is teaching, and that came from a background of, journalism and communications, right? It's like an actual extension of that. So that was my specialty. And I knew if I wanted to do just that and not have to kind of cobble on other roles, I was going to have to narrow down further. And so ultimately that kind of culminated in the work that I do now, which is very, very focused on teaching.
So tell me, so obviously teaching's a big part of it, but so tell me what being tea is. Like if somebody Googles being tea, they pop it up and then they go, okay, well, let me see a little bit more from the owner's perspective. What is being tea?
So I like to describe it as a tea learning space for a different kind of learner. So there's lots of tea classes here, there's videos, there's live classes happening every week, but they're different than the kind of typical what you might see of tea class offerings in a more academic setting, right? Like there's not like a certification A to Z, go through all these different programs in this order and graduate. It is more tea for everyday living. Like it's kind of how I learned tea, is how I think of it, right? I learned tea on the job, working with it every day, living it every day, washing teapots and serving tea to people and drinking and tasting and just being with it, right? And so for me, that is such an important part of actually really learning it and engaging with it that I think it's neglected, right? Like we want these like very rigid structures where it's like this course will certify you as this, and I think those help. They're part of the journey of studying, but it doesn't replace what you do at the tasting table. It doesn't replace like just having it around, right? So all the classes here are they're more playful in that sense. Like it's just exploring things. And there's also really strong emphasis on tea for mental health and emotional support too, which also gets neglected. Huge. So like half of what I teach is actually things structured around meditation and mindfulness with tea, right? And they're presented equally alongside the kind of more sensory, playful stuff. It's just a different kind of learning space. It's low key, low pressure. You don't have to be professional. You could be just starting out. You could be a professional, but maybe you don't have any continuing education in your world. This could be the continuing education, right?
Wow. Yeah. I really like this, especially within the past couple of years. Not only I think a lot more people are seeing that tea fits into their life a bit better than they thought before, but that they also, in the current atmosphere, there's also a great need for mental health support, not just for people that have mental health diagnoses and issues, but everyone should be checking in with their mental health, doing things that help, that are proactive with their mental health. And tea is one of, in my life, one of the best things that has ever been able to help bring those two things together that I've ever experienced. So to have you teaching it not in such a rigid form, like you said, there's a need for a certain amount of structure, but that's not always the learning atmosphere that's needed.
Yeah, like it's atmosphere, and it's also teaching for the moment, so like I started teaching online as a key part of what I do in 2017. So when the pandemic started, it wasn't like a huge shift for me, online is now the totality of what I do. I don't travel and such like I used to. I used to spend a ton of time traveling and teaching on the road, but now it's all online. But the content of like what I teach and the subject matter like did have to shift because it's you're teaching for that moment. One part of my background is also that I'm a certified trauma-informed yoga and meditation teacher. I don't teach yoga classes per se, but I incorporate yoga philosophy and things like that into, especially in the mindfulness space. And in that training program that I took for learning that, on day one of the very first things that we were presented with as a cohort was just the awareness of how really common it is for people to be dealing with very high stress, dealing with either active or previous trauma. And I've had people ask me that too. They're like, well, how common is it really? I'm like, statistically, it's a lot. So, what we were told on day one was like, no doubt in every single class that you teach, there will be somebody in there who could benefit from something that is more supportive for their mental health, without question. Just assume it, right? Just assume it. So like your space, in other words, is not neutral.
No,
it's not a neutral space. And so we have to, so in that sense, like all the classes I teach here, not just the meditation or the mindfulness ones, they're all under the umbrella of trauma informed, like the protocol and the teaching and how everything is arranged and such is with that in mind. Cause like, it's not neutral, it's not separate and removed from the world. People are bringing themselves into the space, no matter what space that they're in.
when I was younger, I've had mental health struggles my whole life.
Hmm.
But when I was younger, it was very like mental health, to work on your mental health is for people that are mentally ill.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah,
it's, it's, it's the fact of that is very different. Like if you look at that definition in current day, no, mental health is for like to do things for your mental health is should be everyone really should be doing
absolutely.
that. Some people are
Yep.
doing it without realizing it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and that's how funny enough with tea. So my kind of intro to Gong Fu tea was I was I was getting more and more into tea, into finer tea and stuff like that. But also, like I said, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. And I was working with a wonderful therapist who was the first one of all the therapists I've seen throughout my life was like, hey, have you heard of mindfulness? And then
Oh
and then
God. Yeah.
and then started just cracking open that egg. And so at first I was resistant to it, but then I started going, okay, like I can understand some of what you're saying. Meanwhile, I'm getting into Gong Fu tea, and I'm sitting down each day with my tea table, and I'm setting that time just for tea. And then I have these two paths, and then all of a sudden one day, just like a ding, all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is mindfulness. I go,
Yes.
so that's why I feel so good. And that's why this is such an important part of my day, is that not only is this tea time, this
Yeah.
is me gathering me time.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
that became, I think you have to have a realization like that to really teach that same lesson on to people.
Yeah.
And I like that you focus with trauma, because trauma is another thing that used to be, that word was really only attached to the most severe cases of trauma, and
And like
anything out.
events, basically, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Like this big event happens in your life, and then that's it.
But now you look back, you look at the new kind of reviewed definition of these things, and it's becoming more and more apparent. And I say that all this because I think that people that do struggle with mental health issues should feel less and less ashamed or embarrassed
Oh
about it.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this all should, if anything, should make those people feel at least a little bit better to like, and if you have been working, at least going to a therapist on a somewhat regular basis, you are ahead of the game on so many people. So
Hmm.
again, to people that are at least in some way, shape, or form, they're just doing something for their mental health. I couldn't applaud that enough.
Yeah. Just acknowledging that it's a thing, right? Yeah.
So what kind
And
of, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, like, one of the the things that really stands out to me about that in the tea space too is, so often when, like, when we're talking about health benefits of tea, especially coming from someone, with a like an industry background and kind of seeing from the business perspective how that works and how we talk about that and things. So much of the conversation is focused on like what you could put on a label, right? Like, what is, and like, what does the tea quote unquote do for me, right? Like how, the antioxidants of it and what will it treat or prevent or whatever. What is this tea good for? And,
Yep.
For me, something I realized some years ago was like language like that. After a while, I kind of felt like it was really hurtful. Like I don't like hearing folks ask that about tea. I understand where the questions come from. So as an educator, I see where that pressure to talk about that and engage in that way comes from. That's just how, we're conditioning people to think that this is what tea does. But as someone who practices with tea very closely, like for me, that's really, that always kind of stings. It's like asking, my ears, I hear it as if somebody were asking that of a person.
You defined that.
What does this person do for me? And I'm just like,
yep. You very well said. I mean, I feel exactly the same. I could say it in my words, but you said it much, much better. I mean, and it's not that I like, again, that it's not scientifically possibly accurate, or that I don't think you should be focusing on those types of health benefits or trying to benefit
Mm-hmm.
your health in ways of, increased antioxidants and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've found success with personally is sitting down with people and just going like, no, 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 no. Just sip the tea. Does it make you feel good? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There.
Yeah.
Whether that's antioxidants, whether that's caffeine, whether that's L-theanine, whether it's millions
all
of
the stuff.
things.
Yeah.
But it's like the point at the end of the day should really be just, I drink tea because it makes me feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that is a health benefit. It's just not a marketable thing you can necessarily put on a wrapper and help sells it in a grocery store.
Right. And, so that's why, like, in this space, like, when I'm teaching about like tea for mental health, it's more around that because, like you said, like, it's not that talking about those things is inaccurate or bad, or I don't know, some of it is inaccurate.
Yeah,
it's wishful thinking, but it's just about balance, right? In the same way of like what we teach as far as what are considered tea skills, like we need balance because it can't, we're building these binaries of how we think that this is what tea looks like in very specific ways, and that's not the whole picture, right? And so when we can break that down within tea, we break it down within ourselves too. Yeah. So that's like why that work, it matters so much too, to consider that. And for me, that was something that like I, personally had felt a real draw to for a long time, but didn't really have like the space where I could talk about that, until like figuring out some way of like, okay, I just got to do it myself,
I've wanted to find ways to do things locally because I have been affected by mental health and I've come out of a lot of it alive. So I know it's possible to pull yourself out of these holes. And that's, these people need to talk to people that have done this, that aren't just saying it because it says it in a book. They've lived it, but it's been, I'll tell you, it is hard. How do you do it? Who do you contact? Is the state going to have an issue with it? Is the health department going to have an issue with it? Will they have an issue that you're not teaching a specific curriculum of mental health? It's not just as easy as having that initial idea and just executing it.
Yeah.
From everything I've seen, I mean, you're doing this very beautifully and in a way that's, I think, very unique. I'm glad that you're unique in this way, but at the same time, it makes me sad that there aren't more people doing work very similar to yours publicly. Yeah. But maybe my thought is, who knows, maybe they just haven't been found yet, or like maybe just they haven't been broadcast to me, so I just haven't seen it yet. But it's something that
I think about that a lot too. Like one of the other programs we have here is a teacher training program. That's not like teaching people about tea, but it's teaching people who know tea how to teach, right? Like it's the pure expression and like exploration of like, how do you educate? How do you do this? Mm-hmm. And, one of the modules that we had recently centers around trauma-informed teaching and equity-centered teaching. And, the cohort who is currently in training with me, like repeatedly throughout the weekend was just like, I wish there was more of this, right? It's got to start somewhere, someone has to like, you start with building that community, and you start with, seeking out other folks who are interested in doing that, and just, creating something that's different, and working with people who have their own ideas for what tea education looks like, the types of communities they want to serve, the types of subjects that they want to teach, and embracing that and saying like that all counts, right? Like air quotes, because maybe they've been told it doesn't count before. It counts, right? Like tea education can look like so many different things and has so many different audiences that it can serve, right? And each individual who teaches it is also their own whole ass person who can bring themselves and their experience to it. And, you know, like making room for that where there previously has not been room for it.
Yep. I was talking with Marco Steep Tea the other day, and he was just talking about all this stuff that's up and coming in Chicago. And, you know, he's like, I want to make sure this person has space to teach their thing. And then I want to make sure this person has teach. And I was like, yeah, that's the correct idea. Like, you really want to go not, well, but I want people to come to my tea education classes. It's like, no. There is enough interest out there for everyone to do their thing. There really is. There's just because one person is teaching tea in a city doesn't mean that, oh, well, this city is spoken for. No, some people see it like that. Yeah, they really do. They're like, there's already a big tea person in my city, so I guess that means I can't do it. And it's like, no, not at all. Like,
yeah. How do you think yoga teachers make a living? Right. That's the idea, is that like people, you know, finding your specialty, right? Finding your voice for it, right? Rather than trying to make something that looks like what everybody else and what the whole industry itself is already offering, you know, doing something that's more personal and it's more unique, right? That's how you find those spaces, but we haven't really had examples of that.
So, okay, you have a space where people can come in and they can attend classes, and these just not necessarily classes, but events and meetings and stuff like that. You also do Patreon, right?
I used to.
That's more so what I want. That's good for the subject that I want to talk upon.
Oh,
tell me,
yes.
Tell me your experience with that, because I didn't do it like for probably the reasons.
Anytime, yeah, somebody was like, I'm thinking about doing this, and I'm just like, no. It's just, so I launched my my class space that I offer, and the program that I offer classes. It is a membership program. That works for me because, you know, as being someone who's self-employed, like having a sustainable source of income is really key, right? You know, rather than the pressure of having to market every single class all the time, because I teach so many classes, there's just no way I can do it. Right. But also, you know, it creates more of a community that gets to know you, right? Which is a nice balance versus constantly teaching for new groups all the time, which is primarily what I've done. It's teaching for new groups all the time. So I launched that program on Patreon. And I will say, like, so I was on there for like, I don't know, 3 years or something like that, I guess. And, you know, it was helpful for getting started as far as like, you know, learning, like creating an editorial calendar for yourself and getting organized and managing communications and things like that. But I think it greatly depends on what somebody's project is that they want to do, whether or not it'll serve them. I mean, like, regardless as to what one may think about them as a company, which, spoiler alert, kind of trash. But as far as like just being a tool, like, I understand the draw for it because it's free. Right. I mean, they still take a cut of your stuff, right? But it's free. So, you know, like what I used now is like paid service, and so you do have to kind of be at a certain level to pay for that as utility, much like paying for web hosting and stuff like that, right? So getting started, like, yeah, it's great because it's free. But depending on the project you're using, if you're just using it primarily to communicate with people and just kind of create buzz and such, and just have conversations, it's fine. If you're using it to build regular content that people can access and things like that, it's terrible, because it's like, it basically the layout of it itself is just a constant, it's like a blog scroll, right? So it's just like line of things. You can't create sections very easily for stuff. The app on their mobile is just trash. Like, it's just like my partner's an artist and also has a Patreon, and like a majority of our time sometimes it's just spent bitching about Patreon and how non-functional it is. So I was very happy to navigate off of it. And, you know, I mean, just as like some food for thought, so I've had this membership program, since like 2017. And so when people would leave the program, when I was on Patreon, the number one reason why people would leave, maybe just after if their financial situation changed, is they disliked interacting with Patreon. It was not convenient for them. It was a terrible user experience. Oh. And I was just like, yeah, no, I can't do that. Yeah, like so I switched over to my fully on my own platform. Everything's on beingt.com right now. There's not the confusion of, some stuff's on Patreon and some stuff's on your page. All on my own page. I switched to that in 2020 and just like, God, love it. Best decision ever.
I've seen industries that have like really made it work. Like a lot of comedians with podcasts, like they'll release more uncensored content or bonus episodes like that. In the pricings, and I get it for that. But when, pandemic happened and everybody's scrambling, to find ways to make money, a lot of people are like, oh, well, Jeff, you do the Instagram lives all the time and you do all then, maybe you should do Patreon. And, at first I'm like, no, not at all. But then all of a sudden you kind of start to feel foolish because you're like, well, maybe I am missing out on a lot. So I did another sort of deep look into it for the purposes that I would possibly use it for. And I was just like, I cannot see. It would be so much extra work to make it work that it would defeat the purpose of doing it.
No, and actually one of the things that's so disenfranchising about it is that it's not a searchable platform. People have to know you first and then go there. And not when I say that, I don't mean like you literally can't search it. Like, yes, you can type in a name, but there's not like a featured forum really for folks. It's hard to get on that splash page on the front. They don't promote people at all. Like it's, it's just not, it's not functional for people who, if you're trying to find an audience there, that's one thing. But if you're trying to grow an audience from scratch there, like it's just next to impossible.
And with T, it was tough because there was so many people that are doing education for free that it was like, that it was, I mean, it just makes it that much harder to ask someone. Well, it's like, it's not harder, but I guess if you're just going to ask somebody to pay, then you got to have, there's got to be something you're bringing to the table that really
there's going to be some like material good. Yeah.
Right. You have knowledge or experiences that others don't have, which some do, but for like the average T person, it's like, no, like it was too much.
That's a subject too that we talk about in the teacher training program too, is the proliferance of free education, right? Like a lot of industries deal with this. I'll reference yoga again, just because that's also the background training that I have. Like yoga teachers deal with this all the time too. Like there's just the amount of free yoga that's available, and it can be really hard because it is basically establishing a default value for people. And it's not that some things, like the idea that it shouldn't be accessible or should be free for people, but we have to understand that that also does impact some people directly. Like if you work for a company and you get a paycheck and promoting on social media and education is your job, that's one thing. But to expect that everybody who's out here is in the same boat, if somebody who they make their living doing this, you cannot ask that of them. I mean, you can, but it's shitty. So, it's like, how do we handle that? Right. And so that's like one of the discussions we have of like, how do you do that without just like crushing your confidence or thinking that you're doomed to be, just constantly in debt,
and if you are doing
everything for free,
if you are doing free content, like I do, you do at some point sort of go like, well, you have to be, like you said, it's about, you also got to be aware about how that affects the T world as a whole. It doesn't mean you don't educate. It just means like when I was trying to educate at first, I was trying to do that really structured thing. And I was like, I found out, that wasn't me, that's not why people were coming to me. People were coming to me because I was just sitting down with the camera. I wasn't necessarily teaching them every X, Y, and Z about tea, but I was just drinking a tea and then just off the top of my head telling people what I thought of it. And you know, some knowledge that helps me to determine why this is and stuff. And that was the value in me. But now if I were just a really good like tea educator, like a really formal educator, I wouldn't be that wise to just put everything out for free. And it's not that people don't deserve free content, but if you are a professional in an industry, it's a hard line. Sometimes it's really hard because you do want to just give people this experience but at the same time, you're like you said, I have to eat at the end of the day too.
Yeah, you wouldn't ask that of any other profession, right? You wouldn't ask your doctor to just do you a solid, right? You wouldn't ask like like a chef to do that for you, right?
Yeah.
And yet we ask this of different people at different, kind of levels within industry without realizing what it means to be, self-employed and doing this for your work, for what you do. And, so like some of the things that we talk about in the program space is like, what is beneficial, right? So if somebody is, because a lot of people who come in the program, I would say like majority of folks are people who, are small business owners or working on an idea, or they're starting up something, or like very rarely do I have anybody who's here who like works for a tea company, right? Like everybody here is just trying to like do their own thing, which is great because it's that same energy. But one of the things that we can do is, if you are somebody who does not need to earn money off of what you teach, right? You could still ask for payment for classes, but then donate that, right? Or like offer that as a scholarship spot or something like that. Like you do not have to pocket it if you don't. Yeah, if you don't need it, it's fine. But still ask for it because it's a value, right? You're saying that this is valuable.
You're keeping the value of the educators.
Exactly. Another thing too is for people to have sliding scale pricing. So like all of my offerings here, including teacher training, are sliding scale pricing. When we're looking at like accessibility, that is hands down one of the strongest things that we can do, is having different pricing level available as well as scholarship available for people. So it doesn't have to be like free or, $1,000 for a course, right? Like there's lots of in between there, I
used to just have tea meetups where I would I'd sit up in a shop on Sunday nights and I'd post on social media, I'm going to be there. I'm serving 2 to 3 teas gong fu. Come on in. I would appreciate it if you could throw $5 in the pot or whatever to help pay for the tea. But say somebody came in and they didn't have that extra money, or sometimes people would message me ahead of time and they'd go, hey man, I would be there this week, but just in all seriousness, I don't have $5 extra. I'd be like, then don't worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or they'd be like, oh, I don't have $5, but I do have like a 1. That's more than cool. Like,
yeah, it's just the conversation about it, right? Like, and especially for folks who are looking into this in a more like professional entrepreneur or like more serious, like developed hobby kind of thing, like however you want to phrase that. Like you want to do something with what you're learning and you're figuring out what that is. It's having the conversation about that, right? Like getting rid of this like financial shame about it. We have to be honest about that, right? Because so often it's just assumed that there's an amount that people can absorb. And I've been reflecting on that myself too over the years as well. Like, a lot of folks know me from teaching at events, like teaching at tea festivals and things like that. That's like largely where a lot of folks have encountered me. What people don't see is like how much debt I had to accrue to do all that work because, and also most of those places I could not go to if I was not sharing a room with somebody or, like had a friend I could stay with in town. I didn't go out to eat anywhere. I would, like many cases, literally, no shit, bring my own food. Like I'd have a cooler. Anyone who's shared with me can attest to this. I would bring a little cooler with me and cook my food during that. I had to do it on such a shoestring budget. And even that is so much more than what, a lot of other folks can afford. So like if we don't have these conversations about stuff like that, then it's just, there's this assumed level of buy-in, and that's the only way that you can start to get involved. And I don't think that should be the case. I don't think that there should be such a high buy-in for people to do things like this.
I agree. But at the same time, you don't want to devalue the product or the activity or the instruction. I get, or it's something I go back and forth about on a regular basis, and I think it's natural to do that. I think it's a good sign that you do that, because
I think you should, like, it's exploring it. Yeah, like it's the recognition that you're open to change and to seeing things from different points of view, and also that your own situation may change, right? Like you may have higher needs in 1 year than in another, so it's like it is a relationship rather than like a checkbox.
Yeah. And it's in this area, unfortunately, there's a huge expectation on, you want me to come to your event, you want me to buy your product, well, you got to give me something for free. Like, it's just a huge attitude here. Like events, not even, well, for tea, yeah, but for all sorts of people that try to do local events, it's real hard. Because if you put even for something where, like with tea, you're getting product and my time and all that.
Exactly.
And that was the attitude I actually gained about that, with that specific, the $5 like meetups, was at one point I got frustrated. I went, well, you know what? If you don't want to pay $5 to come and spend time with me for 2 hours, then don't. Like then clearly this isn't the thing for you. Instead of worrying about, but if I didn't charge, then I could get this many more people, and then maybe this would be more sales. And it's like, but then you're cheapening. You're not only not paying for that product, you're not paying for your time. And then in time, if you do that long enough, you do teach yourself that you don't value yourself as much. And I did that to myself. And I'd go to these Sunday meetings and I'd feel real negative after, and then until I figured out what it was. And then
that's a real, oh my gosh. So I heard like one of my coaches gave this suggestion for pricing, was you want, like, what is under the always asked question, what's the right price to offer something for? And she said it is somewhere between not so low that you resent it, not so high that you feel guilty about it. Somewhere in the middle there. That's basically what it is.
That should be like a golden rule. It really, at least for honest business. Like for me, it's never events or product. It's never how much can I get for this product. It really, for me, the question is usually, can I buy this product, sell it for a reasonable price, and not sink my ship? Yeah, like that's, if I can do those things, solid.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me when you were saying the thing about like should you just do this for free because you get X more people and blah, blah, blah. So earlier this week here in Chicago, this millionaire, billionaire, I don't know, whatever, some dude who had at one point run for mayor of Chicago offered this deal where at 10 gas stations yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, that you could get free gas. You could fill up for free, and he would cover the price of that up to like, I think $200,000 or $300,000 for the whole day, right? For like all the, basically once you hit that mark, the free gas was gone. Right. So they publicized what stations it was. and folks were observing that like, there's a more efficient way that he could have done that, but it doesn't give you that nice PR of like the cars wrapped around, like for miles and miles down the road, right? And so you have like the irony of all these people waiting in line for hours, burning gas to get free gas, and also like clearly showing they don't know the value of their own time, that you would have spent hours in this line getting to this place to get a free tank of gas, that your time probably cost you more than the gas itself. And it's just like, because we have such a weird way of like, ooh, something free, you know?
Yeah.
I thought that was just like such amazing commentary to read throughout the day of people just being like, God, like we are messed up.
Isn't it sad to like see that happen and see it work for these people? Like,
oh, totally. Yeah, it was
see
so
all
weird.
the news stations out front, and you're like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Don't you see?
And it's
what
also
this is?
like, it's just also icky because it's just toying with people that, you know, are in a hard financial state, you know, a lot of them. And
it's making a game out of it.
It's making a game out of it. And
Rush
that's also
down
just
here.
super shitty. But
Get
yeah.
it if you can. But
Yeah.
you might
But
not.
it just reminded me of that, of like the idea of not understanding the value of your time, like that you can't, you know, like one of the examples I share with teachers here is, you know, so when I was teaching some classes here in Chicago pre-pandemic, I had a couple like regular studios that I would teach at. And so some of those classes, it's like the scale of pay is like what a yoga teacher would get. And it's, so I eat very low for a class. Like one space, I was getting like $30 a class, right? Like that's the flat rate, you know, it's $30 or something like that. And so I appreciated teaching in the space because it was connecting with people, and it, you know, to a certain extent, like your teaching itself is the community outreach and the community building. So it is an important part of what you do, regardless of pay.
Yeah.
So I appreciated the spot for that, but I also knew, like, so I don't have a car, and the time to commute to this place, which was 2 buses cross town, plus the setup and the cleanup and the dishes and the planning and everything like that, completely, totally, utterly obliterated any of my take-home pay for this, right? So my setup for this and the types of classes I would teach, I then had a little rule for myself that it would be very simple, very nimble. Everything had to fit within a little rolly bag in my backpack. Because at one point, like when I first started, like I'd literally bring my whole ass tea table and like all this stuff.
If you don't have a car, then that's a lot.
I don't have a car. Yeah, it was just ridiculous. And so those were great classes, but like it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't sustainable for my energy. Wasn't sustainable for the money. So I had to make things very lean and simple, right? But also still like really good material for folks, you know, that was very less about the whole scene of it and more about like the kind of smallness of your personal practice, right? And so that was a really good like training exercise for me to get in the habit of doing that, so that, like I said, you can do something that is between not too low that you resent it, not too high that you feel guilty about it, right? Like I definitely could have used more than $30 for the effort, but I didn't resent it because I was able to control some of those circumstances enough that was fine. That was reasonable. I could accommodate that.
Yeah. And sometimes like that's how I run things. And recently I got tea for a client, and it was a tea that they really wanted. It wasn't a tea I didn't usually source, but had sources for, but it was plus shipping. It was the max that they like really could pay for a tea. There are really good people. They're a very good business. And so I went, listen, I go, I'm going to like, I don't care. This is for like 1 kilogram of tea. Who cares? Like, let's get you the tea. Let's just do it. Very appreciative. They're very, when I went to drop it off and they paid me more than what I asked. And I didn't ask for that. And I don't expect people to do that. But when you're working with people that are willing to do that because they see why you're doing the things you're doing, and you're doing it truly for the betterment of the beverage and for their business as well, that to me is such a huge thank you that it almost means more than that dollar amount.
Yeah.
So it's not that happens every day, but when that does happen, it makes me feel better about not astronomically pricing my things.
Same. Yeah. Like it allows the possibility for that, because, you know, I'm definitely aware that for all of the various programs and things like that I do here, that it's compared to other things that are out there, either individual workshops that are offered by people who are a lot more famous than me, or companies that are bigger than me, or like programs that are offered by schools that are, you know, have multiple staff and things like that. There, like, my pricing is very, very low. It's very undervalued. I get that. But at the same time, like, it does draw the people that I want to work with, right? Like, I don't want the person who's going to be like super high pressured about like, what certificate do I get after this? And, what kind of job can I get? And blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I don't know like it's not the space. It's not the space for that. Right. So it is like this, it draws the type of people that I'm really interested to work with. So it's enough, it's enough for me. It works.
That's beautiful. I'm telling you. So you're in Chicago?
Mm-hmm.
God, I've never been, well, when I used to, right out of high school, I toured with bands doing like photography and videography and stuff. And I did that for like 10, 15 years. So I've been to Chicago like once, but just through passing, like we played a venue and then went to another city like the same night. So I didn't really get to enjoy it, but I am getting to know so many people in Chicago, and there's so many like just tea groups that I would love to, even for just one event, just be a part of. And just it's becoming. And then your tea festival, your damn tea festival that's gonna be the thing to get me there. My wife and I mean, it wouldn't be an easy thing, and we'd have to plan, but
oh yes,
we would probably, I've even planned it out that we'll probably do like there's an overnight Amtrak that we can do from here.
I've done that one.
Chicago. Yep. So that would be a really good option and a good way to, so we've already like even planned it a bit, but Chicago is a place that I do hope in the next year or two that I can get out to, just because. And now talking with you more, learning more about your space, like your space that's going to be one of the top. That's like literally going to be like at the absolute top of my list to go to, because like it's interesting. Like you can know people. Like I said, I've known your name, I've heard your name, I've heard people talk about you. I'm aware of your account, aware that you're an educator, stuff like that. But that's why I love this podcast. That's why I do this, is because I love sitting down with people that I know, but like until I sit down and I like talk with you for an hour, I rather, after I sit and talk with you for an hour, after that hour, I'm like, holy crap. Like I feel like I didn't know this person at all. And in the best way, you're just like, look at all these amazing things that I just learned about this person that, I knew, but like it just gives you that extra connection, I guess.
Much appreciated. Although I should note, like, so the space that you're seeing here in this little box, so this is my teaching space, and I actually I don't have a separate stand, like storefront or anything like that. I teach out of my home.
That's fine.
Not to say you wouldn't be welcome, but
I was gonna say, well, I'm coming anyway.
Right? But like, it's not yet at the point where I could have like a separate, space. That would be great. That would be really great. It's not something that I thought about until the last couple of years, because so much of my work has been mobile and remote. So that's been interesting to reflect on what it's like to settle into a space, like my videos from 2017, 2018, 2019 look really different than these ones here. It's still in the same room, but the setup is different, because I had to like set it up and tear it down for every class I teach, right? Because I also needed the space for packing gear and organizing other workshops and things like that. And so it was kind of temporary. And then when everything shut down in 2020, and I'm just looking at the room and I'm like, well, I'm staying put here for a good while. And so like I built this out a lot more. And so like now this is here. And that's the first time I've ever really had that, where it's like, this is the spot.
Does it feel good?
It's cool
to have that.
I really love it. It's important. It's something I definitely encourage for people, whether professionally or just personally, like having a spot. And it could just be like the corner on a table, or it could be a whole room or a part of a room, whatever, but having something that's regularly there, that you don't have to set up every single time that you want to come have your tea, will make it a lot more feasible for you to do this regularly and just kind of drop into it.
I have a lot of people that come over to my house on a regular basis for tea tastings. Like this room right here, again, I semi tear up and set down. Not really, just more so.
Kind of looks like you're floating in the stars there. I like the little
just
star drop.
I just sort of like
It's
rearrange
cool.
stuff, but like the room is my tea room. Like all my tea wares in here, like all the stuff. And people, I'm always like, at first I was sort of embarrassed, like, oh no, I can meet you. Or people like coming here and being in this room. And I think it's cause there's teaware everywhere. There's books everywhere. I think the room has, since like have really made this room its own. It's the tea room in our house. It makes me feel good to know that other people are enjoying it for that same thing, that they want to come over, not just to see me, but they want to have tea and they want to do it up here. Like they see this either in the videos or in a live session, and they're like, yeah, I want to come have tea, but I want to have tea like in your setup, like with your tea table and your kettle right next to you. And the fact that I created something that in my own home that people want to come and experience, I'm sure you can identify it. It's awesome. It's really special.
It is a very special thing. Like I've had a few folks point that out over the last couple of years, especially like the setup for the space is, and the layout for it is it's very intentional. And when we're doing classes here, it's, there's a few different camera angles, like there's this main one and a couple other ones. And the angle of that, as well as the setup for everything, is very intentional. And the idea is to create something stable, and a couple folks pointed that out over the last couple of years. Like one tea friend of mine here in the space who has their own tea company said, I do a lot of meetings and things like that. Everything's on Zoom now. And there's only 2 spaces that I'm in, come to think of it, that every time I see somebody, it's always the same. And one is your space and the other is, my accountant. Everything else, every time I'm seeing somebody, including myself, when I'm doing meetings, it's always different. It always feels so temporary and kind of hasty. And there's something that's very soothing about being here, and it's the same, but yet like little small quiet changes, and it feels very stable and grounding. And I was like, thank you for noticing that, because it was very intentional, and I'm I'm happy that somebody else picked up on it. Because we are dealing with just so much like uprooting of everything, and so we think of like, what could we do that is like a stabilizing, grounding component for somebody, and even just something is like the place where you do your work, and the energy that you send out through the camera, like that's a big part of that.
Yeah, people just see how much work I get done in this room and how much tea stuff goes on in here, that it's funny. It creates its own little special magic in the space.
Totally.
Well, we've actually gone past our limit, but this was, like I said, I set the clock for 55 minutes and then you just go from there. Sometimes at 55, you hit it and you're like, okay, we're good. We've done everything we needed to do. But sometimes you're going and you're like, let's let this go for a little while.
Yeah, totally.
So first of all, I cannot thank you enough. I've had a really, really good time learning more about you and getting to know you a little bit more.
Likewise, thank you.
If somebody wants to learn more or get in touch with you, what are your preferred ways for that?
Yeah, so folks can find me on Instagram at Being Tea. All my social media is Being Tea. So my Facebook's Being Tea, Twitter's Being Tea. I lurk on Twitter. I don't really tweet very much, but I'm here. And my website is beingtea.com.
Easy. Yeah. I like it.
Very easy. Very easy.
Well, again, I want to thank you a million times. I want to wish you the safest and happiest of days. We're going into spring, so I am sure you are very excited, not only for warmer weather, because you are in Chicago, but also new tea. So
new tea.
So that's that's all going to start rolling in, and every year it's just so exciting to get that new wave.
Yes, it's a good time.
So again, I'm going to encourage everybody that I know that is in Chicago, that if they haven't checked you out, to check you out. But I'll do a last sort of cheers to you, and I'll just thank you again, and please be well.
Thanks, Fred.